All right, I think we are basically live here, just getting started just a couple minutes before the show is officially scheduled to start, just kind of making sure I'm getting off the ground in a timely manner. I was rushing down here to get on this live stream today, so sorry if I'm a little disjointed here just getting going. One thing I do try to usually do is start out every one of these live streams with just kind of an update on where I'm going to be next. And I didn't even look at my calendar here. I do know that I'm going to be speaking at the Island County Republicans on November 1st, so I know that day is coming up. I think I'm the MC there, and up on Whidbey Island. And I know I have some Doge Washington training classes coming up, but I can't remember the dates exactly on those right now off the top of my head. We did the one in Fremont and Kent this last week, or the last week since the last time I did a live stream. And we had a really good turnout, especially in Kent, I think, for the lack of, we didn't get a chance to promote it as much as we should have, but nevertheless, we still had a lot of good people there. So anyway, I do anticipate that we're doing a lot more live stream or a lot more Doge Washington training classes kind of moving forward. One of the things that I mentioned early on, and I'll get to this a little bit and discuss it, I think, and it merits discussion today as we're kind of getting on with the live stream here. This Florida lawsuit against the state of Washington, particularly against Washington State's Department of Licensing for handing out just driver's licenses willy-nilly to anybody who wanted them for commercial driver's licenses, is obviously starting to catch up to us in our state. Certainly catching up to the Department of Licensing. And I outlined that in a video that I launched recently, and I want to get into that a little bit more as we get started. Before I get into too many more details on that, just a quick reminder, this isn't Ask Me Anything, it is live, so ask me your questions, put them in the comment section. It kind of depends on how you're looking at the screen. I'll show you what I'm seeing when I'm looking at the comments. It looks something like this. So this is what I see kind of right down here. And so you can see how much easier it is for me to spot if you put the @ we the governed. It's easier for me to see your questions when you ask them. So again, you can ask me any questions you want. No guarantees I have a good answer for it, but I'll do my best. And anything especially having to do with Washington or really anything at all, that's fine. Go ahead and send them my way. And I'll do my best to answer them as I'm looking at the questions as they pop up here. And then, so getting back to this, as people are starting to put their questions in here, and I do try to remind people, hit @ we the governed, if you can put that in there, and it makes it a little bit easier for me to spot it. Usually as these live streams move on, especially towards the end, there tends to be a lot more questions, and people start adding a lot of commentary in there, which is fine, but if I can't spot the questions out of there, occasionally I've missed questions in the past, and that's not on purpose. It's just that sometimes it gets cycling up, and I can't keep up with it as easily as I would like to. So just reminder to you to just remember to hit that @ we the govern. It makes it just a little bit easier for me to see it. So I did a video and it launched this morning. I think I recorded that one last night, and it was about the Florida, basically the state of Florida suing Washington State and California. It's a 31-page lawsuit. I did link to the original lawsuit in the video itself, so you can go there and read it for yourself. It's a relatively short by legal standards for a lawsuit, and it is straight to the Supreme Court because Article 3, Section 2, you need to, if there's a dispute between two states or two or more states, the Supreme Court is the venue for making a decision on that case. And it is all about the fact that Washington State's Department of Licensing has been handing out, apparently for many years now, commercial driver's licenses to people who clearly are unqualified and illegal. They're not U.S. citizens. They can't speak English. They may not be able to drive a truck. And judging from what happened in Florida, we had one that had a commercial driver's license down there who killed 3 people in a completely illegal maneuver, doing a U-turn across both lanes of the freeway, and ended up killing 3 people in a van. And had more information about that whole case in the story because there was some information revealed in the lawsuit that I wasn't aware of before. And that is very specifically that the driver there had failed to taking the test 13 times before he had been actually given his commercial driver's license in the end. So it's not clear why or how. It doesn't look like his command of the English language was very good. So maybe that was part of the reason why he didn't do well in the test. But I definitely see that there was a big problem for Florida, because then shortly after that had happened, you saw a lot of concerns at the Federal Department of Transportation and warning notices sent out to states like Washington and California. But California gave the same guy a driver's license, commercial driver's license, but they waited for Washington to be the guinea pig and give it to him first, and then California gave it to him afterwards. One of the things, though, that it raised a big red flag, a lot of concerns. And so in Oklahoma, ICE combined with their state patrol down there focused on I-40 for 3 days. And they were basically checking out truck drivers down there. And in just 3 days, they arrested 91 illegals, many of them with extensive criminal histories in other areas, who were driving, 40-ton big rigs all around the country. And fortunately for Washington, there wasn't a single one of them with a Washington state driver's licenses, but they had illegal driver's licenses, commercial driver's licenses from a number of other states, including New York, who apparently is giving out commercial driver's licenses that say no name given. There's a level of incompetence and stupidity and corruption in government that it's impossible to actually exaggerate just how bad these guys really are and how bad they become once they are operating with probably, they feel like, no oversight. It's not just Washington, it's obviously a large number of states that are particularly out of control. I will also point out, though, that it's been a common topic about on my shows and some of my video content in the past, just about the number of non-U.S. citizens that are registered to vote in Washington state, which is something that habitually is done frequently and pretty much every day at the Department of Licensing and also DSHS and other places like that in Washington state. But apparently we're not alone, because they just had, I noticed a recent announcement down in Texas, which is a red state that we've known that they're registering illegals for years now. And they recently came out and admitted that they have discovered 2,700 plus non-U.S. citizens that were registered to vote in Texas. That's a red state that's run by Republicans. This is a widespread problem all over the country. Florida has this problem. A number of other states have this problem. And cleaning up the mess that's been created with corruption or incompetence or bribery or just general dishonesty in the past, it's going to take some time, and they really don't have the time that they need. They need to just start hammering on this. And obviously, I'm kind of waiting to see when Washington state gets sued. I noticed the Trump administration sued Hawaii. It seems like there's a sequential list that are going down, and Washington state's coming up pretty soon to also be sued, just like the other states, like Pennsylvania, like New Hampshire, like Maine and New York, and these other states that are being sued for problems with their voter rolls. So I anticipate that we'll be coming up on that list next. But in the meantime, Florida decided to sue Washington, and deservedly so, because they're having to basically do widespread screening of commercial truck drivers in Florida, since whatever happens in Washington doesn't stay in Washington. You can flee Washington state, but that doesn't mean one of the illegals that can't drive a semi-truck that we gave a commercial driver's license to won't come over and run you over and kill you in another state, as those 3 unfortunate people discovered in Florida recently. And which may be more pervasive than anybody realizes, because I did notice on page 14 of this lawsuit that Washington State has at least admitted so far that they gave out at least 684 of these commercial driver's licenses to people that they did not verify whether they were citizens or where they lived or anything else about them, apparently. So it's probably far worse than that, of course, because you also had a lot of fake IDs. You had a lot of other issues that might have also come up at the same time. And so 684 is our basement number that we're working from. It's probably a lot worse than that as we dig into it. And it should be no surprise, since that story that had come out earlier with the Oregonian about the commercial driver's license testing facility up in Skagit County, where the guy was basically gave out approved 984 commercial driver's license tests, most of whom went and got commercial driver's licenses. And when they put him under surveillance, they found that nobody was showing up. And he was just saying, okay, no, I just passed 6 people in their test today, even though nobody showed up. They had the guy under surveillance. So it's obviously he's lying. And also that they had exposed the wads of cash that were being paid. To pass a test, apparently it's the going rate to bribe the test taker or the person who's administering the test was around $520 to $535. I'm not sure why there was even that discrepancy, but that was the going rate. And so that article had pictures from the original investigation of this cash that was being paid. Obviously, Washington State did a slipshod and sloppy job bothering to go back and really vet that situation because they limited their budget. They only put the guy under surveillance for a little while. They pulled in, I think, about 100 some odd of the people that he gave these approval to these commercial driver's license holders, and most of them failed the test, and so they were able to take those driver's licenses away. But it's very apparent that the problem's much worse than they had even uncovered there, and it doesn't even look like anything happened to that guy. So we got a lot more to talk about in this story, but certainly the bad behavior of the Department of Licensing and the complete and total absolute comprehensive corruption there that exists top to bottom in that agency, and has certainly been pervasive since 2019, clearly indicates that it's going to take a little bit more than just a minor bit of reform there. Probably they're going to have to fire a large percentage of the people who work there, and certainly everybody in upper management, and we will see what the outcome is going to be there. It's overlapping. You got this commercial driver's license issue, and then you also have the illegals that are registered to vote, both of which the Department of Licensing has had everything to do with. So let's jump into some of these questions, and I do see a few of them here. First question here is the American Mutt, and you're asking, can you help direct someone where organizations put their funds into, like supply to travel, work hours, etc.? And that I don't really quite know what you're asking, and I did get a chance, because that happened just before I went live. Sorry about this, I have a little bit of a cold today. Anyway, I did respond that I didn't quite understand that, so I don't see if you've jumped back in, but if you could clarify that question, because I really have no idea what you're talking about there. I don't know what you mean by organizations, and because I don't even know what organizations you're talking about, I'm not really sure how to place the question on the funds. And I'll show you, this is what I'm looking at with these questions here, and you could see, if you're asking a question and you decide to put the @ we the governed, as you can see, it's a lot easier for me to see the question just in the question stream there. So let's get back to this. Next one is from Nate N. Do you think things would get better if we got rid of the minimum wage altogether? And my answer to that is yes, I would get rid of the minimum wage. And they've done plenty of studies on this, and things do not get better when you have a minimum wage artificially and basically preventing people from being able to get jobs. And this is particularly true if you've got any experience with working in minimum wage jobs. And here I'm going to show you what the questions look like again. But as some of you know, I did work in minimum wage jobs myself back in the day, probably below minimum wage. Some of the first jobs I had when I was a little kid. Working on local farms, picking up rocks, raking leaves, cleaning out horse stalls, shoveling manure. Those were some of the first jobs that I remember getting paid. I actually didn't know you could get paid to work. I'd always been working on the farm, and I didn't realize that people actually paid you to do that. I think I was about 9 when I discovered that, and I was a pretty hard worker. Once when I moved off the farm, and I was living with my mom then, I learned that I was mowing lawns and laying down sod and weeding people's yards. Obviously, you don't get paid. You just get paid for the job at that point in time, but I was very happy to be getting that money. And when I think my first official, I was delivering papers for the Seattle Times, and that also is certainly a below minimum wage type job, but I was always thankful to have these types of jobs. That was how I had some money when I was in middle school and riding my bike around, and it was nice to have some pocket money, especially when you're pretty low income, and that's a nice way to actually have some money to get. And then I started my first, I worked in a cabinet shop for a while at above minimum wage. It was a little bit more skilled job, but I also worked as a dishwasher at Pleasant Gardens Restaurant up on Pack Highway, if you know where that is. And, back then the minimum wage was below $4, I remember, and this was in the 80s. But I loved having those jobs. Those jobs meant a lot to me, and the ability to make that kind of money. When you really didn't have a lot else going on, of course, inflation has reduced the value of the dollar since then, but that was a lot of money for me at the time. And if they raised the minimum wage high enough, they would have priced people like me out of the job market. And that's what they're doing right now, Washington State, as they force businesses to shut down or get a little bit more robotic or do something else to make it harder for people to have starting wages. The fallacy of the left has always been with minimum wage is that they presume that somehow, and this may be what they aspire to do to you, but it's a terrible idea, which is that you're going to get a job at minimum wage, you're going to stay there for the rest of your life, and therefore you should be able to raise a family and have a house and a car on minimum wage. And that's not the reality of anybody who gets a job that's minimum wage. You start out at a job minimum wage and you work up. That allows you to get the experience and the skills to ladder up to another job option down the road. And I would eliminate the minimum wage, and I just think that's ridiculous. Let's see. There's, Andrea K. Here's the next question. Have you seen where Washington election officials are encouraging people to mail votes early because of USPS delays? Yes, this is true. So much for their claim that mail-in voting is safe and secure. Yeah, and here's why they're saying that. And this really, to be fair to the Secretary of State and the auditor's offices, the incompetence and weakness associated with this aspect of mail-in voting has everything to do with the post office and its kind of cycle of decline right now. And the main thing is, and we saw this with last year's August primary, where we believe there were maybe as many as 1,000 Republican votes that didn't get counted in the primary, which would have made a difference in the Public Lands Commissioner race. In fact, you wouldn't have a Democrat in the Public Lands Commissioner today were those ballots were they to be delivered on time. And part of it had to do with the way the post office does their stamps and when they date stamp the envelope, which is something that they have to do in a mail-in voting system. Obviously, one of the key and fundamental problems that exists with any kind of mail-in voting system, beyond the fact that you've lost all chain of custody, is you're also entrusting it to another bureaucracy, which has its own set of incompetence and failures just built in and baked in the cake. And so when the post office is struggling, which it's been for a long time, and it's kind of on the steep downward spiral into a repeated significant failure, then you're relying, your entire election system is based on this collapsing bureaucracy and failing institution. And so on top of it being a dumb idea and one that lacks all ability to track what's going on with your ballot once it gets sent out from whatever mystery secret sauce black box program they have, you don't even know what happens to it after that. And then this is a serious problem, and the post office has been warning about it. Keep in mind, this is in addition to what we saw a couple years ago with like the Renton post office deciding not to even deliver their ballots, the completed ballots, even deliver them to the King County Elections Department. And to their credit, King County's credit, not the post offices, they actually noticed that they weren't getting any ballots from a certain area, and they had called up the post office, the Renton Highlands post office, and said, what the heck's going on? And the Renton Highlands said, oh yeah, they're piling up here, but it's not our problem. Suck it up and come get it. And that's what they did, but that isn't actually how it's supposed to work. And as the post office continues to spiral into the ground, relying on them to carry the load in a mail-in voting system is not a good idea. Now, that being said, obviously, there's a very high percentage of Washington State voters that clearly, just based on the evidence, that they don't rely on the post office. They either hand-deliver it to a drop box or they hand-deliver it directly to the auditor's office. And it actually looks like the majority of ballots are turned in that way right now, but not everybody. And so you still have a sizable percentage of them that they're rolling the dice and they're putting the mail or the ballots into the mailbox. And that's an even bigger mistake this cycle than it has been in the past. So I do encourage you to make sure that that you get your mail, that you get your ballots in early. And again, I am fully aware, more aware than probably most people, of all the failings and the problems and the challenges that exist in the voting system. But the reason why people institute crappy voting systems and all these other problems and manipulate it a bit is because there's enough good people out there voting that it's making it hard for them to modify or change the results or impact the elections the way they want them. And so that's why everybody getting all your ballots in there as soon as possible. You can do that at the same time that you're lobbying to end mail-in voting and to actually clean up the voter rolls. It doesn't mean you stop and decide that 5 minutes of your time is too much work. It means that you still vote and you also work to lobby and change the way the voting system operates. But you are correct, and that was a good observation about the issue there. Kent Tappan, I want to become active. How do I do that? Well, Kent, it kind of depends on where you are, but I would recommend that you look up a group online nearest to you that's interested in some of the same issues you are. Best thing to do if you want to be an activist, I think, is pay attention to local government first. That's kind of where you can get your feet wet. You don't have to travel so much. It's the easiest to kind of get your head wrapped around how it works. The city, the county, the school district, wherever you live. It could be the fire district or the port district. You got usually lots of options. So Kent, it really just depends on where you live. If your group hasn't had it, I'm happy to come out and give you guys Doge Washington training so that I can teach you how to use the Public Records Act and go in and dig into the finances. Always follow the money. That's going to reveal a lot about almost anybody, especially anybody that's corruption. Kevin Haynes, what time on the 1st are you speaking? That I don't know. I think I'm the MC there, which means that I'm probably speaking on again, off again the whole time for the program. So it's whatever the Lincoln Day dinner is for the Island County Republicans. I just happen to have looked at that on my calendar, so I know that one's off the top of my head. Jason, hey Glenn, I hope you're doing well. Sideshow Bob is talking about a budget cuts next legislative session. Is he serious? And will the legislature go along with this? And Bob is serious, Governor Bob, probably because he doesn't have much of a choice. Now, there's, Bob lies a lot, right? And so Ferguson probably just can't help himself. He's going to say whatever he thinks he needs to say. There's ample room in the Washington state budget for cuts. I'd be happy to help him with those cuts, but they usually won't look to me. But that doesn't mean we can't provide our own helpful list of cuts to make. To close about what appears to be at least $1 billion shortfall. He's saying $2 billion, but I don't know if it's really going to be a full $2 billion. It looks like it's about $1 billion for sure, but I could be wrong because there's another, OFM will come out with another budget forecast pretty soon. A lot of that's because all their projections, of course, for the tax receipts that they anticipated getting from all of their cool and new taxes, of course, all their projections were wrong. And as usual, the government bureaucrats involved in this process are always wrong. They always have been. This goes back 100 years. So they're surprising themselves with their current failures again. And so as those receipts drop, it's called the Lafleur curve. Raise taxes high enough, then you actually lose money. You don't actually gain tax dollars. And that's what they're experiencing right now. And there's plenty of places you could cut significantly in the budget if you really cared about it. I don't think he's at the point where he'll make serious cuts. He'll make some cuts, probably because he doesn't really want to have to make hard choices. Bob Ferguson will do across-the-board cuts, which is essentially just a dumbed-down, lazy way of cutting government because it's not really the best way of cutting the budget. Not all agencies are equal, not all bureaucrats are equal, and not all departments are equal. Some departments deserve much bigger cuts. Puget Sound Partnership, for example, you could eliminate that agency and nobody will notice. And you could probably get rid of their building. That should be obviously first on the chopping block. Fire everybody, downsize the whole thing, get rid of it, and save us the drama and the waste of space that agency's been since it was founded a number of years ago. You could also look at Evergreen State College. Obviously, that's a worldwide embarrassment and a national laughingstock, and shutting down Evergreen State College would save the state quite a bit of money. You could shut down Western as well. Nobody'd really notice it being gone. You'd probably lose a few jobs up in Bellingham, but parasitical jobs like that don't produce value aren't really the thing that's going to impact the economy. But it could impact the budget by just reducing how many students you put into debt for life for low value and low quality degrees. You could also go into places like Labor and Industries and Department of Ecology, and you could probably do easily 50% cuts there without any noticeable negative impact on most people. And DSHS has a lot of cuts that could be made there, DCYF too. So all these are departments that there's a lot of opportunity to make some cuts there. And OSPI, certainly, you could probably end most of the major positions at OSPI. It's run by Reichdahl, and he's a disaster, so obviously he's not going to be wanting to go along with that, but that's how you could make cuts without having to cut teachers. But there's a lot of opportunity for this. It's just that I think what the Republicans need to do is propose their own alternative budget and then let Ferguson dance around and flounder into whatever he's going into right now. Now, we do have a fairly decent-sized rainy day fund. They can blow through it in about 12 months if they decide they want to do that. They've been holding back on that so far, but I anticipate something like that could happen next year. You're unlikely to see taxes into this next legislative cycle or because it's the short session. The shorter session right before election, 60 days, is generally not the session where the legislature likes to pass taxes. And mainly it's because it's too fresh in people's mind, and even with the short attention span of the average voter in Washington state, they'll still remember those tax increases that you just passed and that just hits them as election day is coming. So usually they pass, as they did this last year, they'll pass tax increases during the long session, which is a 90-day session. By the way, anything that shortens the legislative session is good for humanity and society and freedom and liberty. Anything that shortens that session, because every day the legislature's in session, your freedom and liberty is certainly at risk, and so's your wallet. So I do appreciate having a much shorter session coming up, but there will be a lot of drama, a lot of dumb bills that are proposed that have no chance of getting out of the legislature, mostly because the politicians want to use them as talking points. And they don't really care if they get passed or not. They just want to propose them. So I'd expect all your leftists in Seattle to propose just insane bills, as they always do. And they aren't really going to fight for them because they don't really want them to come out. They just want to be able to use them as fodder for their campaigns coming up. Remember, one of their motivations to close the session on time and early even, or they can't close it early, but they close it on time. One of their main motivations for doing that really is that they can't fundraise while they're in the legislative session. And so their opposition, whoever it is able to go out and fundraise and beat up on them and do mailers against them and all kinds of stuff while they're stuck in session. And under the campaign finance laws in our state, they can't actually raise money at all. And so there's a high degree of incentive, especially for those who have challenging campaigns. And it's not always Republican on Democrat. Sometimes it's Democrat on Democrat. But regardless, there's going to be a high motivation for them to get out of session so they can raise campaign money and so they can go out and campaign for your votes. And so that's going to motivate them to probably close the session on time, regardless of their budget problems. T.Z. Burton, I just listened to Kevin Dahlgren. He's a former Portland social worker. Can we get a Pacific Northwest Coalition to go after the billions of wasted taxpayer dollars in this grift? I'm assuming, to this grift. And that's a good question. I mean, obviously, billions of dollars have been wasted in the homeless industrial complex. I just saw an article recently out of Spokane where they had shut down a incredibly destructive and harmful and wasteful major homeless housing project that was literally costing the city of Spokane $1 million a month to run. And even for Lisa Brown, who's no stranger to squandering your future and our tax dollars with her dumb ideas, even with her incompetence, she recognized that had to be shut down. So they shut it down. But it's astounding the amount of money that's squandered and wasted. It's generally estimated right now that about $1 billion a year is wasted in the Puget Sound region alone on low-income housing, the whole homeless industrial complex. And as Bruce Harrell, current mayor of Seattle and running for mayor once again, and of the two terrible people running, he's the least terrible of the terrible two. But the one thing he mentioned, and I think this is an accident on his part, he admitted what most of us have already known for a long time, that 70% is probably higher of the people who claim to be homeless or drug addicts on the streets of Seattle don't come from around here. They've come from other parts of the country, and they flocked here due to the extreme giveaways. That's why they nickname it Free-addle, just giving away everything, and pallets and tarps and propane and food and clothing and Wi-Fi and medical care and tents and everything else that you could want, needles, everything else you could want to be a drug addict or a mental patient on the streets of Seattle. And so they've been attracted to come to Washington State, and that money's just squandered and wasted. And so I think that anything that you're not going to get the money back, it's usually been stolen or grifted away, but at least you could stop the bleeding. And I think that's a good first step. Stop it and end all the free stuff. You'll see that most of them will probably leave and go somewhere else down in California or Illinois or someplace where the grift is better, but we don't need to be funding it here, which we definitely are. There's a question. I don't know if this is a question. Wood and Loki, Florida during Washington. No, Florida's suing Washington, but anyway, that's and we deserve it. Let's see. Here's a question here from Brian B. Did you figure out where Bob went missing to a few weeks back? No, but I know those records requests have been filed. And I do anticipate we'll find out where he went on his secret sauce, out of state, no notice, no calendar, exposures. Very weird for a governor to disappear for that length of time. Now, supposedly he was with Biden somewhere. For all I know, he was trying to help Biden with his disaster of a presidential library operation. If you've been paying attention, former President Biden can't seem to raise the money to build his new library. And there's nothing really to remember about his presidency really anyway, and nobody wants to celebrate, including the Democrat donors that he's trying to pitch it to. And especially with the Obama library disaster, Temple of Doom up in Chicago, which I did a video recently because I saw these mock the memes and the trolling of the Obama Tower of Doom with the presidential library up there in Chicago, clearly a mistake on the lake, is so funny, and I just had to do a video about it. I know that that's a little outside the scope of what I usually do videos on, but I enjoyed it, and that was kind of funny. Yeah, this is funny. Yes, by the way, I am sick. Here's a question from, all right, at least I have some kind of a minor cold. I definitely have something right now. Are you really sick or just miss getting your 9th COVID booster shot? And yeah, that would be funny. I don't know. I just came down with something recently, and I was out doing a lot of timber work this weekend in the property, and so I don't know if that's, you're out there. It was rainy, and I don't know. Who knows? And I actually don't get sick very often. It's pretty rare, but I definitely am a little bit under the weather, which means when I go to try to record some videos tonight, it's going to be not quite as fun as it usually is. Nate, thanks for answering. I think people need to read Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman. Yes, that's true. They need to. Even just Hayek's Road to Serfdom and maybe I would say Atlas Shrugged, just anything that helps you get a better sense of where good intentions, and I'll put air quotes around that, go astray, and how government pretty much always gets it wrong. Let's see, there's somebody here, Linda Connor, I hate to vote, or I hated to vote. We know it's a scam. Well, listen, there's all kinds of problems with it. Nobody's been a bigger critic and more open about that than I have been. But that being said, we need to have as many of your votes in hand to balance things out and surprise them enough that it keeps us from totally going under while we try to fix what the problems are in our state. Let's see, here's a question here. I'm jumping to the questions, guys, because I see that I'm starting to fall behind by quite a bit. And let me show you this just so you could see it, because a number of people think I'm skipping questions. I can't see all, this is what I'm looking at right here, and this is what I had up above. And so what I have to do is while I'm moving, I got to make sure that I don't screw up and skip a question, but I can do that sometimes. So anyway, sorry about that. Let me go back to this question here. Have you noticed that most of the political signs have no party affiliation on them anymore? This is from Jack. Well, the reason why you don't see them is in an off-year election like this, most of the positions that are on the ballot, school board, city council, if you're in a charter county, it's going to be some of your charter commissioners, county councilmen, port commissioners, a lot of others, they're nonpartisan positions. And so what happens is they don't put a party affiliation because supposedly there is no party affiliation for those positions. That's why you don't see them. That'll be totally different next year. Because next year you've got legislators, congressmen, some senators, the counties, the 32 counties that are not home rule charter counties, those are all partisan positions. And so that's why it looks a little different each time, but that's why you'll see the partisan positions next year. Why, Dad, why? At We've Governed, Washington ESD, Warn website, have not seen so many agriculture-related, seems in Eastern Washington, before this year, 2025. Looking back in time on the website too, why is this new? I don't know what you say with I'm assuming you're talking about the Washington ESD's Warren website. Let's see. That's going to be the ag scholarships or ag programs that they have. I think that's what you're referring to. There's a number of different ag programs that do have, and yes, they're usually more of them are concentrated in Eastern Washington. But I'm not aware of anything changing this year, actually. So I'd be surprised. I am still on the board of the Thurston County Farm Bureau, and I was on the board of the State Farm Bureau for a while. So I'm moderately familiar with it, but I'm not totally familiar with what you're talking about. And I don't think there's been anything particularly different this cycle, this go around. Let's see. There's a question. Here we go. And this is not from a name that I'm going to be able to identify. In fact, here, I'll show you. This is why I can't identify it. Don't ask me what that name is. Beverly Hills man arrested, Brentwood man charged in separate criminal cases linked to fraud in public homelessness funds. Do you believe there will be similar results for King County if audited and investigated? And the answer is absolutely yes. Yeah, there's a bunch of people in King County that probably should go to prison. If we can figure out which ones stole the money and how much they actually stole and where it went, if not just in their pocket. And King County is going to be obviously the worst. It's the biggest. But I don't know how far down that rabbit hole the feds will really get. Some of these nonprofits are most likely money laundering operations for the Sinaloa drug cartel. There's a percentage of them that likely are. Nobody really knows with total certainty exactly how many, but it's a big problem. There's a question here from Daniel Morrison. Let's see. I received a mailer today from Clark County Republican Party with endorsed candidates listed. Can I trust the list? Well, Daniel, if you want to vote the way the Clark County Republicans would recommend, you can trust that list. I'm familiar with the list. I'm not familiar with everybody on the list, but I am familiar that they were putting this out because I did speak at an event out in Washougal recently where they were talking about putting out that list. So it looks like they got it. They're going to be very happy to know that you have it and that you are asking that question. Let's see. Going down here to actual questions. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. Steve Leach. Did the gold reserves at Fort Knox ever get audited? That is a great question. And to my knowledge, I don't think they've been fully audited. I believe that they sent some people down there to look at it a bit, but I don't believe they've been fully audited. So your suspicion and concern is well founded, my friend. That's a good question, and it's one I would continue to ask, and I like asking questions like that. TZ Burton here. Can you address the progressive bus tour to Spokane to influence the city politics? Isn't Spokane fully Democrat captured now with Seattle politicians? Well, the challenge, okay, so number one, what you're referring to there is it's actually a PAC that the Democrats have had for a long time called the Bus. And essentially what they do is they think, okay, we've thoroughly destroyed Seattle and we're happy with the disaster that we've turned Seattle into, but we can't just marinate in our success because it's so nasty. So what we have to do is get all of our activists out of Seattle and keep making every place around us, or as far out as we can drive this bus, make their places just as bad as where we live so that we don't lose more people and get abandoned like Detroit. And so they take this bus and they drive these activists out to places like Spokane. Now, Spokane is a little unusual because, A, it's a lot further drive than normal. Normally, they would drive them up to like Bellingham or Olympia or Everett or someplace like that, but instead they're going all the way to Spokane. And so, and I believe last year they were heading to Yakima when they were trying to flip that unsuccessfully, but they tried to flip that Republican seat out there. And so, anyway, the buses are heading over to Spokane. Partially, this is really Lisa Brown's connection to the Seattle funding crew. Lisa Brown's the mayor of Spokane. She was formerly head of the Department of Commerce. She directed in a disproportionate amount of grants into Spokane as a way to bribe her pathway to become mayor, and that was successful. partially because the Republicans decided to divide up and make it easier for her. But generally, she has been there, and she's done the terrible job that we all expected her to do. And so she's been highly effective at really destroying and damaging Spokane quite a bit. And so, but because of that, there are people out in Spokane who have historically voted Democrat that are maybe rethinking that alliance. They may not be telling their friends at the Wine and Cheese Club meetings, but they're deciding, man, this is probably not our best option to have this goofy lady and dishonest people, and they're Democrats here, running our city because we don't like what it looks like. And if you don't believe me, go visit Spokane, because you're going to see that it looks a lot like Seattle. But of course, they need to bus in these crazy activists from Seattle to keep Spokane on the path to becoming Seattle. And that's really why they're busting them out there. And they'll also send them into Boise, and they'll send them into other states. They usually are a little more secretive about that, but that's ultimately what they do. So as I've said many times, what happens in Seattle doesn't stay in Seattle. What happens in Washington State doesn't stay in Washington State either. It'll spread to, and already has spread to, Idaho and Wyoming and North Dakota. You can't avoid it. It spreads like a disease. And that's why you have to defeat it here, because it's not going to help you. Nate, I'm 100% positive if we had voted in either one of the sheriff candidates for governor, we would be doing way better. Yes, I agree, that's true. And so it's a lesson to learn in the sense that, we've been able to elect probably two of the worst people Washington State's ever been able to scrounge up in its political class. And the results speak for themselves. Basically, obviously, increased crime, squandering the resources, jacking up the taxes, and doing their best to make life miserable. But at that, I do kind of see that we're hitting this apex curve, and so we'll see where it goes. Jason Fisher, what do you see? This is another question here. What do you see the Seattle Supreme Court doing with the natural gas initiative? And is there any worthwhile mayoral candidate in Vancouver to vote for? It's a good question about Vancouver. I am not sure, and I'm sorry, I just don't know right off the top of my head on the Vancouver race. But going to the Seattle Supreme Court decision on the natural gas, obviously the Washington State Supreme Court has been pretty dishonest and pretty thoroughly compromised. You certainly wouldn't ever want to put your freedom or liberty in their hands, because they will happily destroy it if the Democrats tell them that's what they have to do. So my concern is that the Democrats clearly want a natural gas ban. The people clearly don't, but the Democrats on the court might. And I could see them I could see them going either way. But we'll have to see. It would be less surprising if they vote it down. It's more corrupt if they do that, but that'd be less surprising. Also, though, sometimes the court does occasionally they want to pretend like they care and that they have read the state constitution and that they care about the rule of law. And so sometimes they'll throw out a flyer, and this might be one of those, because it is pretty popular. Let's see. John McElfresh, what do you think will come of the DOJ investigation of voter rolls and sanctuary policies, as well as the Florida case? It's a good question, and there are two. It'll be a couple different things. Now, I'm less familiar. Let me deal with the Florida case first, then I'll jump into the DOJ investigation. The Florida case is a little unusual because it's a state suing another state. So it goes straight to the Supreme Court. I think in most cases, the Supreme Court's very reluctant at the federal level to have major outcomes occur with that type of litigation, because they also think, they probably tend to believe that it invites more and more litigation between the states, and they generally try to avoid it. However, I will point out that the true cost of losing that case to Washington isn't as financially ruinous as it may originally sound. It's a relatively small, it might be an easy case for Washington to lose and negotiate away something that isn't, like, they probably don't want anybody to look behind the scenes in the complete corruption of the Department of Licensing. So I could see them trying to negotiate something different as it relates to that. But I don't think Washington or California are in a very good place with this Florida lawsuit, because it's so obvious that both states were both egregiously incompetent and by policy willfully malicious in what they did that ultimately led to those people being killed down in Florida. And when people die, it tends to be a little bit more serious. Let's go back to DOJ investigations. So I believe the feds are up to 9 states now, including Hawaii. And I'm not sure which state's going to be the 10th one they sue, but Washington State's getting close to this list now. We're moving up. And so they will sue us, and we will lose. And Washington State will lose, as we deserve to lose. And they will have access to the information, the voter rolls that Secretary of State Hobbs and Bob Ferguson and the Democrats want to try to hide from them. Mostly the significant thing that immediately pops out is similar to what they found in Texas and some of these other states recently, where they're finding a lot of non-U.S. citizens registered to vote. And the reason for that is that's the easiest thing to pull out of the voter rolls. They won't get all the non-U.S. citizens that are registered to vote, people with good fake IDs or who have properly, taken over somebody's identification. They may not get those in the first go-around, but they definitely should get anybody who's been registered to vote against their will and they're here on an H-1B or a student visa or some type of visa like that. So they're here legally, but they're registered to vote. I've had 24 of those given to me over the years, shown to me, I should say. Most of the people are pretty scared about it getting out there, but from a lot of different countries. And so those would be easy because the Homeland Security has that list, and they can easily cross-reference it and say, yeah, these are not citizens. Then you have the illegals. Some of them will be here on some sort of quasi, they were refugees, or they catch and release in the border in the Biden administration, whatever. There'll be a large number of those they can probably pull out pretty easily. The harder ones are going to be the ones that came here legally, and they aren't, the names. If you've ever done I've done a lot of voter roll analysis where you're trying to look down and you say, that guy that ICE arrested, is he in the voter roll? Well, his name's there 15 times, but I'm not sure which one's him, or if he's even on that list. Same name, there's millions of people in the voter roll list, and there's a lot of similar names. So you'd have to really look at that. That's, I think, the number one brush that they're going to go over. The second thing that they've been very explicit about exposing is how many people are simultaneously voted in multiple, or both voted but also registered to vote in multiple states. And there's tens of thousands of people like that. Now, a lot of times it's not because they're trying to commit anything nefarious. They just moved to another state, got registered to vote in that state, and they didn't think to go cancel their registration here in Washington. That happens a lot. It's really, really common. And this is particularly true when you understand how people move. Roughly 10% of the population moves every year. It doesn't mean they move out of state. It just means that they move roughly every year, 1% a month. Now, sometimes it's within that 10% cohort, there's probably most of them, I don't know about most, but like half of them are the ones that just keep moving all the time. And so they make up this lion's share of these moves. But there are still some people, tens of thousands, that tend to move out. There's tens of thousands that move in. So far, Washington State's been a net importer of people, not a net exporter of people. And so you're going to see that they will look for that. People registered to vote in multiple states. They're going to look for the people who voted simultaneously in multiple states. A couple years back, we caught 250 that had voted in California and Washington same time. You tend to have a lot of crossover with simultaneous voting in Oregon and Washington, California and Washington, and Colorado and Washington, and now Nevada and Washington, because of the mail-in voting systems of those states. And then since 2020, there's a few other states that are typically in that list. Then you'll also have people that they're going to be looking at. I'm sure they'll also cross-reference the Social Security Administration master death lists, and they'll have some people that died and seem to still be voting after death. That number's probably not as big as people think it is, at least not in our state. The last time I looked at it, I don't think it's a huge number, but it's going to be some. And then you're also going to be looking at people that have left long ago and no longer have lived in the state for decades or many years, and yet somehow they keep them on the voter rolls illegally, and somehow they seem to either be mysteriously voting now, or they just keep them there. They're people with no attachment to anything. There's no evidence they actually are people. There's a voter ID there, but it's not clear that it's a person. They'll also look for the double, triple, and quadruplicate sort of voter registrations the Department of Licensing seems to be doing when people go get a new license. These are the things that will come out of this. What gets done with it is a separate question, and it really depends. I anticipate they're going to have resolved this issue in a number of the states before Washington State goes public. So once again, we're not top of the list, we're not the bottom, but we're going to be somewhere in the middle as they process these other states. So you can see New York and New Hampshire, California, Oregon, I think it's Nevada, Pennsylvania. These other states are going to be ahead of us, most likely. So anyway, sorry, that was a long answer to that question. TZ Burton, I looked at the state Democrat homepage, and they listed all their accomplishments. Well, they must have a lot of taxes to say they achieved. Can the Republicans put together a website together like theirs? They're beating us like a drum. You mean the state homepage? I think that's what you're referring to. Well, I suppose, remember the Democrats do run every branch of government, and on average, they usually get about 100-to-1 in funding to the Republicans in the state. So I would anticipate if they don't have a better website, there's something really egregiously wrong. But that would be interesting. I would actually go look and say that we should put together, the Republicans, I should say, should put something together that also details all those accomplishments that the Democrats have had, like increasing crime to its highest level in decades, increasing drug addiction and drug deaths, increasing government waste, increasing taxes, increasing the bloat of government. These are all things that are accomplishments, and the Democrats are probably quite proud of them, but they don't want to sell themselves with those suggestions. John McElfresh again, with the current downturn in Democrat opinion, will it change the votes here? Change, or will it take a reform or removal of the mail-in voting system here? That's a good question. There's really two different things going on, right? One is the shifting of people who at one time maybe they just reflexively voted for Democrats, and now they're just seeing the misery of that choice, and so they're changing. There's some people like that. I run into them all the time. That's a slower change over time. You're rarely going to get more than a couple percentage of that each election cycle, but there is a decent percentage like that. I don't see a lot of people switch from Republican to Democrat. I just don't see that. But I do see quite a bit about going the other direction. And then the other thing relates to that, but a major reform or elimination of the mail-in voting system would, along with cleaning up the voting rolls at the same time, would genuinely create a voting event that there is no consultant or anybody in the state of Washington that has any idea how to measure that or predict where that's going to go. I would say that in a situation like that, a lot of edge districts that are relatively close, of which there's about 14 of them in the state legislature, they would be completely up for grabs. And it would still require the Republicans, in order to successfully take those seats, still have to have people that don't need a drool cup to function in public, and they have to have more than just God telling them to run. They are going to have some kind of a plan to actually win, and they'll actually have to be willing to campaign, and you still have to have serious people running. But in those cases where you do, I think you had a really good chance of flipping the state legislature. I could see that happening. Let's see. Here's a question on Linda Connor. Not sure if you covered this already. What are your thoughts on the Senate Joint Resolution 8201? I don't have that memorized, but I'm assuming that's the one about saying that the state can invest the money. I'm voting no, and I'm voting no not with a huge, strong sense of it, but I'm voting no because government always gets it wrong. We have incompetent clowns and crooks in government running the show most of the time. Give them a chance, they'll find a way to screw it up really badly. It's not efficient the way they manage the money right now. There's no doubt about that. Had the same debate a number of years ago with the Trust Lands Task Force, the trust fund out of timber sales. It's about a $200 million fund sitting there, and anemically it increases. It doesn't even keep up with inflation. And so there's an obvious argument there about changing how they invest it. The problem is the clowns that you would assign to do that with, and the likely corruption that goes hand in hand with it, I can't see how they wouldn't do something exceptionally stupid and lose most of it, given the chance. So we will see. But that is a good question. Thanks for asking about that. Let's see. There's a question here. This didn't say outweigh the government, but I'll jump on it anyway. The most recent JLARC report found that Washington Department of Health does not review hospitals' reports of adverse health events as required by law. How can we ensure that they do? Well, elect a Republican who will come into the Department of Health and probably fire everybody there, and then get people in there who actually care about your health and not about promoting the drug agenda from the pharmaceutical companies. That's probably how I would start. But until then, I wouldn't count on them. And you can't trust, as we've seen during COVID, that Washington State Department of Health is pretty much thoroughly corrupted. And so that's what I would probably do. Let's see. Linda, you asked basically the same question again. I think I covered this on 8201. Let me know if that's not what you think I did. Next question here. Nate N. Where was the No Kings protest when King Inslee was around? What the heck? Yeah, it's been pretty funny. And I actually have a couple family members that went to one of their local No Kings protests. And I love them, but I feel sad and for them going there. Obviously, it was a very well-organized and orchestrated campaign. It was very expensive to do it. If you've ever been involved in organizing these big rallies or events like this, it is not easy and it's not free. And it's incredibly time-consuming. You can make it a lot easier and more efficient if you have paid people taking point on all the logistics, which is one of the things that the left is really good at. And because they pay everybody to do it, you're going to have events that go off much better. That also helps them support the logistics of just getting a lot of the extra supplies and all kinds of other things going on. Obviously, if you saw any of the videos, I didn't go to any. I didn't go to the nearest one to me, but I had a lot of friends that went there and did some recording and videos of it. And obviously, blow up Halloween costumes and these other things. They probably had a booming business. But it seemed really sad to me, and nowhere near any kind of serious level of energy. It did remind me of protests I used to see when I was at Columbia in college, of people who were trying to live the glory days of the 1960s, and they simply wanted to go back and, this was their way to do it, but they don't really want to take any serious steps. I wish they would have protests like this all the time. It drains the money and energy, doesn't achieve anything. You really only have a couple of values that you get from having a large demonstration like this, and they don't bother me as long as they're not violent or they're trying to burn down the courthouse. I don't mind these events at all. I think they're perfectly fine. But protests like this, at least for the left, creates kind of a quasi-religious experience for those who go there. Many of them are hostile to religion in general. And so they don't really realize that they've used this outlet for their expression as their substitute for church, say. And so they go out there and they're chanting together and we're all united together and we're standing together. It is very similar to the experience that people will have going to a revival meeting or going to church or praying together. It is kind of similar in the way that people will feel it. It is. And so if you don't have any religion, this is essentially the religion for you. But the other thing is, what you're trying to do with a protest of any kind is you're trying to send a message, which I'm sure that they tried to there. But I found it fairly confusing, and probably they put a lot of money into the planning on this, and they didn't really think through how it's going to be viewed for those who didn't bother to show up to the protest. But you also do it as a show of force in the sense of, we have got a lot of people. That's why you do a big protest. So, for instance, if you can't get together 1,000 or more people, not always a good idea to organize. It's a lot of energy and time. You put together the same amount of energy and time organizing a protest for 100 people as you do for 1,000. So the bigger the number, just the more serious it looks, and your message is a little bit more impactful. But the other thing, and this is kind of where it crosses over into this religious side of things, is that it helps you, the people who attend, it helps them know they're not alone. And during COVID, when we had a lot of those protests against Inslee, and I was involved in speaking at a number of them, and I helped organize one of them, it's a lot of work and energy, and I wouldn't do it all the time. But every now and then, it's good to have one because it helps you meet a bunch of other people who share your concerns, and especially with the censorship that we were experiencing at that time, it lets you know that you're not alone, and that there's a lot of people in the state and in your community that feel the same way you do. And it could be that if you're a lefty, this is probably the same feeling you get there, even though the media is kind of on their side already. I just wasn't that impressed with it. I was surprised that it was as weak as it was, considering how much money they spent all around the country. That's about as many people as you can get out for almost anything. And with all the money they put into it, the paid organizing and advertising and all that, I'm just surprised it wasn't bigger, actually. Let's see. I don't think these are questions here. Jason Fisher, what's the political situation in Idaho, Montana, and what's the Boise City Council like? Is it pretty much a lost cause? Well, no place is a lost cause. I mean, obviously, I'm fighting in Washington, which is certainly to the left of Idaho and Montana. What you see in Idaho and Montana, though, is a lot of lefty political folk who have moved there, and then they decide, I can't get elected to call myself a Democrat, so I'll call myself a Republican now suddenly. And so that's what you see a lot of that going on. The Boise City Council isn't a lot different than the Olympia City Council. It's about the same. That's true in Bozeman, Missoula, and Billings as well. That's why you see drug addicts and homeless people sprawled out in those streets. And remember, Boise, going back to Boise, the whole Supreme Court case in the Ninth Circuit about not having a camping ban, that was the Boise case, the decision that they've used to excuse having all of these tent cities everywhere. But the Boise City Council is definitely a problem. Now, just because a state votes for Trump doesn't mean that you have good politicians locally. It doesn't, because a state has Republicans there, doesn't mean that they're good. That just means that the political class is culturally shifting in that direction. So they might call themselves Republicans, and they may actually vote for Democrat policies. I've seen it plenty of times already. That's what I see happening in places like South Dakota sometimes, or North Dakota as well, where they say they're Republican, and probably they are, but they, at least that's the name that they have next to them, but it doesn't mean that they're pushing policies that are small government, limited exposure policies. Everything's possible to turn it around. One of the benefits you have growing up in a state like Washington is the ability to see and recognize the danger signs of some of these dumb policies before they officially become dominant everywhere else. And so you can warn and push back on and defeat them here. Then you can defeat them much easier in these other states. Let's see, I've got a number of other questions here. Let me make sure I'm not missing too many of these as we're coming down. I'm going to try to get to all the questions that I see right now for sure. I'm just going to try to do some videos tonight, and it's going to take me a while to be prepped up for that, so I want to try to get that done if I can. Gregorius Greg, not sure if you covered this, but I am visiting tons of red states. What's the best initiative that is in the ballot? Well, I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. There's two initiatives that are collecting signatures. Well, three initiatives that they're collecting signatures for right now, Washington State, and they're all three good. But that's not going to be on the ballot till next year. So I don't know what that has to do with traveling in these other states. There could be other states with better initiatives. Mojo Mama, will Republicans versus Democrat votes make any difference in who rules us? That's a good question. Well, let me tell you, there's a big difference in who gets elected. And it is even in the mayor's race in Seattle. Both of them are horrible people, of course, and neither one of them would you ever want to run anything. But there is a difference between complete lunacy and just a deceptive, incompetent fool. And so, in that case, I would say you vote for the fool and ignore the lunatic, because you actually can really create massive damage with really bad people in there. And so there is a difference. I've certainly seen a difference. in local government, in particular, when you elect and change the political affiliation of the people who are in there. Now, again, sometimes they're very disappointing because a lot of Republicans who get in there, they don't know how to overcome the bureaucracy. They don't know how to overcome the internal dynamics of government locally. They need a lot of support, truthfully, once they get in there. They don't know how to overcome the overwhelming paperwork that gets thrown at them and the 52 commissions they get put on, so it burns up all the time and they can't reform anything because they're busy going to meetings. They don't know how to manage their staff and tell them no. There's definite problems associated with once they get in. That is infinitely more preferable than to have crazy loons in there trying to look for every excuse to raise taxes, and among other things. And so you would see quite a difference. But it absolutely depends on the person, and that is true. Jason Fisher, thoughts on status? Seattle mayor's race. Is Bruce Harrell pretty much done at this point? And will the city council moving further to the left, or do we see a reboot of Bhagwan Sawant? Well, Sawant's running for Congress right now, which is more funny to me than anything else. And if we sent that lunatic to Washington, D.C., that would definitely cement Washington's reputation as definitely being a state filled with clowns. But I don't know, Bruce Harrell, it's probably fairly close. Wilson's probably ahead of him. But there may be a little bit of concern that Wilson's just a little too crazy. We'll have to see. I don't expect huge reform in Seattle right now. What I do think is the most likely reform in our state, where it comes from, partially through the feds and partially through, if it's through the election system being changed and inspected for the first time in a generation. So if that happens, I think there's a lot of potential changes that would occur, probably starting with the legislature more than anything else. Mind Blown Watcher, related to the CDL lawsuit, if Florida wins, will that create grounds to sue over other policies? Well, that's what the Supreme Court, I guarantee you, has in the back of their mind. It really depends on the ruling and how they approach it. The prayer for relief, which is essentially the part of the lawsuit, is in the last couple pages of it, where they're asking Washington State essentially just to cover the legal costs and to cover some of the damage costs and then to fix its system. And so it's a relatively low cost loss for Washington if Washington loses the case. So the Supreme Court might be more inclined to go that way. But it certainly would open the door for other types of lawsuits against Washington. But it wouldn't just be us. They'd be lawsuits against New York and Illinois and California. You'd probably see a number of different cases like that. So we'll see what happens. Let's see. Gregorius Greg, you're right about the same Republicans in red states voting like a Democrat. Yeah, I know. I've seen this many times. And it's kind of amazing how much that happens. TZ Burton, can you talk about the Democrats' paid family and medical leave program? Not intelligently right now. I'm familiar with it, but I don't know that I can give you a lot of update. That hasn't been an area where there's been a lot of arguing or fighting over it lately. There has been some dispute historically on that program because of the length of time that it's been assigned and how costly it is for businesses to take it on. But I don't have a lot of other information on that. And it's probably not, I'll have to look into a little bit more. So thanks for raising that question. Okay. Oh, I see. Gregorius Greg here. Sorry, that was a typo. Are there any initiatives on our ballot this time? And right now there is not. There is a constitutional change, which is that first one that was asked, and I talked about it later or earlier in the Ask Me Anything video. And that really has to do with investment fund. It would be considered a relatively small change to the state constitution. It's not particularly controversial, other than it's just a letting the bureaucrats have more of a heyday with a fund, a retirement fund program, so they can invest a little bit more aggressively. Zeruti, it's depressing that you're peppering bad talking points amongst your reasoned thought. You mentioned people pretending to support small government. Don't even call out Trump's administration. Well, no, that's a good point. The Trump administration's done many things that I would completely disagree with. I'll give you a couple of examples. And I mean, generally, in the big scheme of things and downsizing government, some types of downsizing government, the Trump administration's been great, probably more important, probably than any other government agency in 100 years. But there's other areas that's not small government at all. The biggest challenge that somebody in the Trump administration, probably starting with Trump, but other people around him too, I think it's a terrible idea for government to own part of businesses. I just don't think that does anything except open the door to future corruption. Even if today everybody's a bunch of angels and they're doing things perfectly, the inevitable door that opens to corruption in the future is not hard to figure out. Whether it doesn't matter whether it's Intel or a car company or anything else, mineral exploration, that shifting of government ownership, partial ownership in those businesses is a bad idea. And it doesn't end well. It never has ended well, and it never will end well, and it won't end well this time. So I would definitely, that would be something I would be totally opposed to the Trump administration on. If Trump was sitting here and there's a couple policies I've always disagreed with him about from the beginning, very specifically, civil asset forfeiture. I completely disagree with him on that. I wanted to eliminate that. Years ago, I've testified in the legislature on this, or at least substantially restrict it and make it a much more difficult process so that it's not so easy for government to abuse that. I completely disagree with him on eminent domain for the same reason. He's a property developer, so he's had experience with it benefiting his projects in the past, and so he has a positive view of it, whereas I've seen it be nothing but abused. And so I don't have the same view that he has on that. Listen, I can nitpick a lot of things about the Trump administration that would be different than how I would view things, especially as a small government guy. The Democrats have just gone insane. I don't find even a single Democrat that's even remotely attached to normalcy left in the state of Washington. Every now and then I might find a couple local ones. Mayor Baucus up in Auburn, I mean, she's sometimes saying and she's a Democrat. There's a few of these local government people that I've worked with in the past, but a lot of them are just lunatics right now. And the policies they're pushing are crazy and harmful and destructive. And when you're comparing that, you have the Democrats are pushing things that are going to absolutely kill you, with increasing crime, with destroying the government as fast as possible, bloating the tax load beyond all human capacity to handle it, giving away free billions of dollars to the homeless grifting industrial complex or to pharmaceutical companies or whatever they want to do. I think that stuff's terrible and super impactful and destructive. The OSPI, the way that they've approached public education, in a way to ensure that we've dumbed down future generations beyond all recognition and way below any level they've ever been before, willfully as policy, and destroying the family unit, all of these other basic things, inability to define what a woman is. I mean, these are just weird, harmful, terribly destructive policies. The neocon sort of approach in government, which seems to be most closely aligned right now with the Democrats. Republicans fall into the trap too, where they decide they want to get into every single war in the world that exists out there. Big mistake, terrible idea. Wouldn't want to do that either. And I don't like handing our money out to every country in the world. I would certainly have a much more restrained use of American dollars overseas. And in fact, there's just some conflicts and places that we shouldn't go into. But I compare that to my challenges and differences that I absolutely do have with the Trump administration, and there's no comparison. And that's why I'm going to be focused. The other thing is, we live in Washington State, and the Trump administration right now, the handful of things they are doing here are more likely to make our life better in this state than anything else. It's not like the state's run by Republicans. It's run by the clowns, and we definitely have a lot of problems with it. Jason got a question here. How long will the government shutdown last? Well, I mean, this is like a betting game right now. I would guess that we hit the record The only reason we don't is if the Democrats decide that the talking points narrative is collapsing and they can't get enough media support for their story. I think that's probably that would be that. I could see if they got their polling back, the Democrats got their polling back in the Senate, because essentially that's the obstacle. The Democrats in the House don't matter because the House has already passed a continuing resolution. So essentially, they're just talking about doing this clean resolution in the Senate. And so I think if the Democrats got together and they decide, hey, listen, this isn't working out for us, we may actually hurt ourselves even more. Once they recognize that, I see it change. It could change overnight. It could change the next day. I just don't know how long that's going to take for them to realize that's an outcome, or if the consultants they're paying to collect that information would actually give them that information if that's the result that they find. So we'll just have to see. Ultimately, 30 days wouldn't surprise me. I know we're only, 18 days into it now, but I could totally see another 2 weeks. If it goes beyond 35 days, that's when we're starting to get into new record territory. That would be impressive to me. At that point in time, they might as well just go into next year. And the cascade effect of what that looks like, I don't know, because we've never been here before, and it'll be interesting to see what actually happens. But anyway, what I would say is I got a couple more questions. Let me just show you guys what I'm looking at here real quick. I'm going to do just a couple more of these questions that are left, and then I'm going to try to get my acting gear and try to get a video produced here tonight. Jason is the only, looks like it's the only question I have here. There's a lot of comments, the only question I see here. So Jason Fisher, how long will the government shutdown last? I think that's the question I just answered, and in fact, it's the same one that you had before. Let's see. Let me look down here and make sure I didn't skip anybody at the end. Oh, I can't believe it. I actually got all the questions that were asked here today. Sorry, and I apologize in advance or after the fact, I guess, just for being a little under the weather here. And that probably made it a little bit harder to watch this live stream. So with that, I'm going to call the day. I look forward to seeing you guys out there. If I see you in the field, please make sure you come up and say hi, whether that's in Highland County or one of the Doge Washington training classes. I don't think I have a Doge training class between now and the next live stream. I am planning to do that next Tuesday. I haven't looked at my calendar to see if there's a problem on that, but I think that's true. And I hope to get a couple more videos out here before then as well. We got a lot of stuff to cover. For every video I put out, there's probably 10 that I can't get to. It drives me crazy personally, and it's one of the reasons why I am trying to get a studio built much closer to my place, so I don't have the commute that I'm dealing with to do it here. But I'm very happy to get these out, and appreciate everybody that logged in here. Hopefully you enjoy these other videos. Feel free to share anything I do with other people, and let me know if there's something I'm doing that really annoys you. It's always helpful to get that kind of feedback as well. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.